Hi, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about the electron transport chain. This is the last part of aerobic cell respiration. So, what do we need to know about the electron transport chain? First of all, you need to know the location. The electron transport chain occurs in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. The inner membrane of the mitochondria is this very convoluted membrane right here. That is the inner membrane. And what do we need for the electron transport chain? We need three things. We need oxygen. This is why you breathe. This is where the breathing in oxygen comes from. The oxygen helps run our electron transport chain. And then we also need these energetic electrons found in NADH and FADH2. The result is that we end up with a lot of ATP, a huge amount of ATP, 30 to 34, right? Previously, we produced how many ATP did we get in Krebs? Only 2. How many ATP did we get in glycolysis? Only 2. This is going to produce many, many more ATP than that. So the electron transport chain is vital. It's actually the reason why you need oxygen, because oxygen is going to help us create all of this ATP. Okay, so what does the electron transport chain do? Well, basically, NADH and FADH2 are going to give up its electrons, and those electrons are going to be given to oxygen. When oxygen grabs onto electrons, it's going to react with a few other things around it, and it's going to make water. Right? So there's like a little mini chemical reaction in there. This process of creating water by giving electrons to oxygen is actually going to load hydrogen ions into the intermembrane space of a mitochondrion. So it sounds kind of crazy, but basically we have hydrogen ions being loaded in this little space kind of on the outside of the matrix. It looks like that. What I'm highlighting in red, that is the intermembrane space. We're going to load it with hydrogen ions, and those hydrogen ions are going to help us make ATP. You don't need to know all of the details of the electron transport chain, but I am going to explain the overall process so you can see this amazing thing that happens in all of our bodies a quadrillion times every second. So first of all, notice that in the lower left, we have NADH and FADH2, and they are giving up their electrons. So here's my electrons. I'm circling it in red. At the end of the electron transport chain is oxygen. It's waiting at the end of the ETC. Oxygen is going to pull the electron towards it. And when oxygen gets the electron, it's going to make water. Meanwhile, the pull of electrons down the ETC is going to pump hydrogen ions across, and it's going to build this concentration gradient. The hydrogen ions are going to move back through a special protein, and that is going to make ATP. So step 1, the proteins of the electron transport chain take the electrons from NADH and FADH2. We see them here taking those electrons away. As the electrons move down the ETC, they lose energy and they pump hydrogen ions across. All right. So now we have all of these hydrogen ions in the intermembrane space. They're getting really crowded. All right, as more and more protons gather in the intermembrane space, you can see them there, right? They're getting really crowded. They want to diffuse out. So what do? They diffuse out of a special protein embedded in the membrane called the ATP synthase. That is the ATP synthase. The ATP synthase allows hydrogen ions to move back where they came from. And it's actually kind of an amazing protein because what happens is as the hydrogen ions move through the ATP synthase, it causes this bottom part of the ATP synthase to rotate. And as it rotates, it adds a phosphate to ADP to make ATP. And we can make lots of ATP from this movement. ATP synthase is an enzyme that adds a phosphate to ADP, creating ATP. You see that in the picture in the lower right. But this enzyme can only operate when hydrogen ions are flowing through. So that was a very quick explanation of the electron transport chain. What is the electron transport chain for? It uses electrons from NADH and FADH2. It also uses oxygen, and it creates a lot of ATP, and it creates some water as well. And it does it by pulling the electrons down the ETC, pumping hydrogen ions into the intermembrane space, and then allowing those hydrogen ions to diffuse through the ATP synthase, which will make ATP. So let's compare the 3 steps of aerobic cell respiration. First of all, we have glycolysis. Glycolysis produces a measly 2. And then we have the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle also produces a measly 2 ATP. And then we have the electron transport chain, which produces an incredible 34 ATP. The electron transport chain, thanks to its use of oxygen, will produce way more ATP than the other parts of cell respiration. All right, that is all for the electron transport chain. We'll put all of these steps together later. If you have any questions, please let me know.